Hello and welcome to another VGC 2012 clinic. I'm Dr. Fidget and today I'm going to show you how to build teams. Now, best I can tell, this is not how the vast majority of players build teams. However, I found this to be faster, easier, and far more reliable at building strong teams. Let's start off with some don'ts. First, don't copy someone else's team. It's lazy, disrespectful, and teaches you nothing. Not only that, but if there was enough information out there that you could copy it, that means better people than you have seen it and already know how to beat it. Second, don't rate analyses as C's. While they were written with the best intentions, they stick to the same format as singles. In doubles, the best moves and EVs for a Pokemon vary wildly depending on the rest of your team. Suggesting Pokemon only have one or two good sets in doubles is the opposite of helpful. I could go into more detail, but that's for another time. For now, just forget they exist. Last, don't put EVs or full movesets on Pokemon before you've locked down what 6 Pokemon will be on your team. If you ever wondered why the metagame was so centralized or why people make such similar teams, this is the root of the problem. The less you commit to up front, the more room you have to pick interesting partners and more surprising sets down the road. Basically, the longer you keep your options open, the easier it'll be to pick the best one. Trust me, your team will be stronger for it. On to the fun stuff. Spreadsheets. Before you get started building a team, you should have some kind of template, something that you can easily look at and get all your information at a glance while you're building. Another thing you need is a threat checklist. While building your team, you want to check off everything on this list by choosing Pokemon or moves that handle them. You don't need to build counter teams to anything, and if one or two things isn't checked off and they aren't incredibly threatening to your team, that's fine. It just helps you keep an eye on the big picture. That way you never end up with a team that's good against everything but loses to Bronzong, for example. I'll leave a link to this template in the description, but I encourage you to make your own. I use 2 monitors, so it's formatted extra wide, and I haven't updated my threat list in months. Now you've got your template, you've got your list, it's time to start building. Picking your first 2 Pokemon is trivial. You can pick your favorites, pick something that's worked for you in the past, or just pick something people told you aren't viable. With limited exceptions, you can make any 2 into a viable team. I'm going to walk you through my last team. It started, as my teams so often do, based around puns. The working title was Empoleon Strikes Back, and yes, I give all my teams working titles. They usually change on completion though. Anyway, it began with Empoleon, obviously, and Lando. Russ. As a happy coincidence, they have exceptional defensive synergy. If you're wondering why I put 1s in the boxes, not 2s or 4s or any of their resistances, this is another one of those big picture things. I just want to see at a glance if a trend is developing. I needed to keep an eye on how many things are weak to something, regardless of how weak they are. I guess I could just use X's or something, but whatever. At this point, I picked my next Pokemon based on team weaknesses, base speed, and the threat list. Empoleon is weak to fighting, and while Landorus resists it by being a flying type, he doesn't have any good flying moves. So a flying or psychic type Pokemon could help the team. The base speeds are a bit odd too. 60 is lower than I'd like for Tailwind teams, and 101 is a bit high for Trick Room, though they could both function in either. A Trick Room Pokemon would be able to cross more things off the checklist, and a Psychic type would be less likely to share a weakness with these two. So I look at Psychic Trick Roomers with a mid-speed. The obvious choice is Cresselia, but I want something with more power and a better move pool, so I end up choosing Mesprit. It still has decent bulk and levitate, so I don't have to worry about putting Earthquake on Landorus later. Because I picked Mesprit specifically for these moves, I'm going to go ahead and put them down right away, but nothing else until the whole team is chosen. Now choosing the next Pokemon, do the same thing. Check your weaknesses, check your threat list gaps, and finally your average speed. I ended up putting Safeguard Scissor here because Safeguard beats Spore, T-Wave, and Will-O-Wisp users. Scissor is also a great Cresselia counter and fits well with the mid-speed Trick Room thing I have going. Now for the next Pokemon, I looked at the threat list and I knew my team needed some form of weather control. Already having 2 Steel types and a Landorus on my team, Sandstorm was the obvious choice. I usually don't use the auto weathers, but this time Tyranitar just made too much sense. Now, between these 5, I know I'll be able to cover everything else in the threat list while choosing moves, so I can pick my last mon without worrying about that. What does worry me though is that my team is slow and I only have Mesprit to rely on for setup, so I decided to pick a Thunder Wave user. Now having 2 weaknesses to Bug, Fighting, Ground, and Water makes Zapdos the best Pokemon for the job. Immune to 1, resists 2, and has super effective stab for 3. But I was already resenting how dreadfully common this team would become, so I took Electros instead. Quick disclaimer, picking one Pokemon or another just to be contrarian usually isn't the best idea, but sometimes it pays off. Now that we have our 6, it's time to make a decision on any abilities you've left hanging. After that, we can start filling in moves. Start with stab moves first. Fill in the stabs for your whole team before you move on. On Pokemon like Landorus and Empoleon that don't have a useful move for one of their stabs, you don't need to cover that type. I like to check off each type of move my team uses here. Again, just a good at-a-glance reference. Next, if you wanted to put anything not damage related on your Pokemon, now is the time. Weather, status, buffs, whatever. I have an implied protect always on my 4th slot. Now it's time for coverage moves. Keep an eye over here and over here when you're doing it. Try and pick moves that help the Pokemon you're putting it on as well as the team as a whole. After that, items. Stuff like flying gems you may have already put on when you added acrobatics, but for everything else you should have waited. It's easier to see the best recipient of things like berries, gems, and a focus sash this way. Last but not least, nature and EVs. These are going to be incredibly specific to each Pokemon's role within its team. Why people try and put them on before this point is beyond me. Regardless, at this point it's usually pretty obvious what EVs you should be running. I'm not going to want to run speed on any of these mons, especially Landorus. That means I can pump it all into power and HP for everyone. But that's it! That's how to make teams. If you do it right, you'll be making well-rounded, completely original, totally competitive teams. It works every time.